And welcome to the Sage 300 General Administration webinar. Hopefully we can showcase a few of the nice features that you're all aware of or not aware of. So if you look at the agenda today, we'll be covering creating new users, assigning security groups to those users, some authorization settings. I'll talk about UI screens, which is basically user interface screens. Also the profiles that goes with that, looking quickly at visual processes, which are basically one screen does all in terms of a module, for those that are not familiar with those screens, and a bit of data integrity explained as well. So I'm going to jump straight into my Sage desktop environment. As you're aware, we have two environments for Sage. Currently, the current version for Sage is 2019. Which is the latest. This is the one that I will be showcasing today. So I'm going to log in as the administrator, as you can see my demo company. And I'll be greeted by some notification here which says earlier processing was not completed. So I'll explain that as I go along. But that is basically due to a restart record or some process that did not complete in Sage. So first of all, when you log into Sage, you'll have on the left-hand side a module called Administrative Services, and that's where most of the administrative tasks are done in terms of setting up security and users. So the first one we'll look at is creating new users. So if I click on User, you have the panel popping up, or the window popping up, and then you could use your Finder to actually see if there's new users or existing users. But I'll call up this account user that I've created and talk about this one just in a nutshell. As we're all aware, the licensing in Sage is concurrent, so you can create as many users as you like. There's no limitation in terms of that. It's just limitation on the number of sessions that's connected concurrently. So with this user logged on, or in terms of the profile, you can see you've got two options there for user type. Excuse me. Time card and a normal user. Time card used in the project and job costing module. You can also set some language preferences there, especially the English for Australia. So you could set that there. And you have a few methods of authentication when you log on. So I've set this user to have both Windows and Sage 300. And as you can see, you need to specify a domain and a username if you use Windows. So in terms of Windows authentication, that's your authentication you'll use when you log on in the morning, and I will show you that. There's a few other settings here as well that you can set, which enables the user to either log on at certain times. You can disable the account. You can restrict the account, as you can see, in terms of days and times. So these are all settings that can be managed by your Sage administrator. So once that account is saved, you will then have to proceed to the next step, which is the security groups, where you define your security group. So I'll show you an example of what I've done here. If I go to, let's say, General Ledger, and I click on my group ID, which is entry only, you can see Sage security groups are normally functional based. So that enables you to grant access or deny access to a certain function in Sage. So you can see I've done a little bit of setup here, which is for this demonstration purposes. You can select or unselect these, and those will grant the security access to Sage for that group. The next step is basically then, as you've set up all your security groups per module, you'll need to proceed to user authorizations, where you basically assign those security groups to specific users. And user authorizations are company-based, or I would say database-based. And what I mean by that is, if you have multiple databases or multiple entities set up in your Sage, you will have to do this for each entity. Now, there is a few ways to speed up that process, which I will show you in a second as well. because you can export some of these setups, and you can actually edit and modify them in Excel and then import them again, which speeds up the process a bit. But as you can see, this accounts user, I've assigned some view rights to the admin services part, and I will explain that as well, because in some cases you will have to give certain rights to the admin, especially for users to go and change their print destinations. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. If I call up the view one, you can see there's a tick where it says change print destination. That's fairly important. Otherwise, users won't be able to switch between preview, file, or printer. So that's one of the default settings that should be there. Good. So if we proceed to the next one, we assign the user authorizations. I've spoken about this one. And you grant normally the user access here by group ID. And we normally set up 3 or 4 default groups like entry rights, view rights, full rights, and administrative rights, and sometimes some other restrictions as well, or rights. The next step is customized directories. I don't think a lot of users are aware of customized directories, but what they mean is they normally customized in the sense per user. So if I open this, you will see that I've got the ability to add users here, companies, and then a directory. So what this means in terms of general users is that you can assign certain reports or changes or customized reports, standard Sage reports based on user and company. And that enables you to print different type of forms for different type of scenarios or different companies. So it makes it quite useful if you're running 2 or 3 or 4 multiple entities in your Sage system. And to use an example, the invoice form or the invoice template looks different for each one of them. You can easily then say, if I log in as user admin and I'm using this company, go and have a look in that folder and use, let's say, the invoice form for that folder or statement form. So that's what it's used for. This is quite useful, as I said, because it doesn't affect your standard Sage reports then, and consultants actually knows where the customized folders or reports are sitting on your network. Data activation is the module that we use to activate data. So these are typical modules as we are aware of in Sage. So if you go data activation, you will see all the modules that you can activate in terms of what you've purchased for your solution. So you can tick them and it will actually create the module and activate the data tables, which then your consultant needs to set it up for you. UI Profile is an interesting function in Sage. The reason being is that you can actually, we call it configure the screen because it's actually configuration, it's not customization, just to differentiate between the two. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the one that I've done here as a sample for today, I've called this Profile ID Accounts because I reckon this is a good example for the financial accountants on the call. And you can see there's a screen attached to it. It links to my general ledger application, and there's some control to hide. Now, what this is all about is this function allows the Sage administrator to take away buttons on a screen. So I'll show you an example of what I've done. If I go to the general ledger and I go to the account screen, you will notice as an administrator, I'm logged in, I can see all the fields here. So what I want to bring your attention to is the actual control account box here. So you can see I can tick or untick this box as an administrator. I'm going to log in now as the account user that I've created. I might just have to get the right password. Give me a second there. Let me just reset the password there. This is the way you can reset a password as well. If you have forgotten your password, you can just notify your Sage administrator. So if I log in as the account user and go to that same screen that I've put a UI profile on, which is this one, you will notice that the control tick, making the account a control account, is actually off. So the tick is normally based in this area, and you can see it's actually taken off. So to show you how I've done that in terms of managing your Sage system, I'll just log in again as an administrator. And I go to my assign UI profiles, and you will see that I've assigned this UI profile of accounts to the user accounts. So where do you actually change that setting? That is normally done on the screen itself. That's where you have to specify what you want to show and what do you want to hide in terms of users. So if I go back to the account screen and just call this up, you will need to go to your top menu bar where you see File, and you can see it says Customize there. As soon as I click on Customize, it will give me the option to select the profiles I created. And as you can see, there was one called Accounts. And if I click on Accounts and just go down to some of these field descriptions here, you will see that the control account one is actually unticked. And that's how I managed to hide that function or tick box in terms of a screen. So what I'm trying to get to and showcase for you guys that's logged on today in terms of the webinar is to show you that in terms of security and administrating security, Sage has functional security, which can be switched on or off, and that's done in your security group section. But it also has the ability to go and hide or take away some functions based on your UI profiles, which makes it a bit easier to administrate, and also it lends itself to better security around your system. So you can see there's quite a lot of selections here, and you can then go and unselect or select these that you want to show to users. So the next one I actually want to show you in terms of process flows is the visual processes. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but in the later versions of Sage, I think it was from 2016 or 14 as well, they assigned a new module called Visual Processes. And Visual Processes gets assigned by users as well. But in a nutshell, what they are is these visual processes that Sage, the standard ones that Sage provided us, that you can use in terms of your role. So if you're an accounts payable clerk, you're welcome to use these visual processes if you on the later versions of Sage. And it's basically the concept of following the bouncing ball, which makes it fairly easy to navigate yourself around the system. It also aids in the ability to have new users take up the system fairly quick. They don't have to learn the system how to navigate around, let's say, some of this menu trees. They can just go directly into these functions that Sage has provided us. So you can see as I click on AP invoice entry, it just takes me directly into the screen where I can do that. It also applies for reports and other links to other functions in the system. So if I go back to the visual processes, you will see most of the modules have visual processes there already standard in Sage, but you can also edit these visual processes. So as an administrator, if you right click on it and you say edit, it will go into an edit mode. As you can see, it looks like a PowerPoint type of scenario. And if I just move some of these around, I can easily click on there and say, I want to change the link. And I actually wanted to go to not payment entry, but maybe create payment batch. Click OK there. And basically you can save this visual process as something else. And you can actually assign that then to specific users. So that makes it quite effective in terms of role-based functions in Sage. You can take away buttons, you can add some of these. You also have the ability to link, let's say, web URLs. So if you want to use a web address here, you can also add them there. Maybe it's your company's web address, or you want to look at products or something like that. So that's quite useful. I love this feature in Sage, and it makes it quite easy to use in the system as well. Now, in terms of the message that you saw when I logged into Sage, which I will show you again for those that logged in a little bit later, I get this prompt or notification in Sage telling me something went wrong. That's basically a restart record, what we call a restart record, and that can be found in restart maintenance. So if I look at my restart maintenance, you will see this one is clean, so there's no process that did not finish. So I'm going to cause a process not to finish by just going back to my desktop and resolve that problem with the data inside Excel. I'll be able to then import that file again. So I'll just quickly change this to account structure. Yep, so we resolved that issue. I'll save my file. And if we log on to the general ledger again to import that, we should be greeted with the restart record. So I'll import. Yep, I get greeted by my restart record. I've got an option here to delete it or to restart. So I'll just select restart. And as you can see there, the restart record enabled me to actually take the process further. So that's standard in Sage, and you will get that message on all transaction screens or master files that you're trying to import from Excel if there's an issue. So if we continue with some of these other functions, Sage has the ability to make a quick, what we call a database dump, which is basically a quick backup. Now, I must reiterate, this is not to replace your standard server backups or the backups that your IT administrators do, but it is a quick way of making a backup before you, let's say, make any big postings in Sage. If you're just wary of, let's say, running a day end in Sage and you want to make sure that you've got a backup, this is one of the features. So database backup is normally a very low risk function in Sage, because you're basically just taking data out of the system into a flat file, and you can specify the directory where you want to put it. So, you know, I'll just start this process. You select the company, you can see it's processing through all the data tables in Sage, and when it's done, it will give you a little message and say it's completed with the amount of tables that it's processed. So you'll get this message. That's a fairly low risk function in Sage. The higher risk function is the database load, because that basically replaces your database in Sage. So I would not recommend to do this on your own. If you have rights, please speak to your consultant or get in touch with them if you need to do this. And it only gets done in certain cases where we need to replace data as well. So be careful using that one on your own. Rather speak to your Sage consultant. The last but not least, in the administrative reports, this is a new feature they've built into the later versions of Sage as well. It's basically where you can print some security and UI profile report, and it will show you the actual in English what each user have available in terms of their security setting. So you can see there on the screen, for accounts user, I've linked them to the view group, and it shows what view rights they have. They can change print destination, and they can run data integrity as well. So just to get back to the logon, because we normally get a lot of questions around this. If I, let me just close the screen. If I log in as accounts again, I can basically log in with Windows authentication. So in terms of setting that up, just to go back. So if I select my accounts user, I can say I want to use both methods of authentication. You will then have to link your Sage user to your Windows domain user and basically click on browse. This is where your IT administrators can assist you as well. And you can see we've got a few users there on the network. You will pick your username, and that will allow you to log on with your Windows or network security as well. Okay, it's what we call single sign-on sometimes in the IT world. Now, last but not least, there's a bit of functions that's new in Sage as well in terms of the last few updates. Sage has released a update on the Australian legislation section. So you can see there, this is a module now that's available in the new version of Sage, which is called the Australian Tax Report. So if you go to that module, you can set up your BAS requirements or your BAS configurations. I'll just show you fairly quickly what I've done. I know I'm using sample data for this, so my apologies for that. But you can set up these BAS codes and you can link them now to your normal tax setups in Sage. You can also make use of GL accounts. So if you do go to, let's say, salary and wages, you can then say link that to a GL account because you want to make use of that. So, you know, wages payables or direct. And at the end, once you've completed all these codes and setups to the correct tax classes, you know, if it's taxable or not, you can then run your business activity statement. So you can actually click on, you want to do it for period 1 to 3 if you're on a quarterly basis, and you can see it will automatically refresh the screens of what my BAS classifications and codes are. With some of the other information, you might have to link your GL accounts to get your payroll and other information in place. As you can see on that one, unfortunately, I see there's no value there for this one. But at the end of the day, you can save this. You can print your BAS report. So I think this is a great new feature that Sage has added for us in the Australian region and legislation area for Australia. So you can print this and you can give this to your accountant for submitting your BAS. There is a function where you can also export a JSON file. So that you just need to check with your accountant, but yeah, it has the ability to export what we call electronic JSON file.